flames of fire hang on to burning wires. We don't care anymore.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder and we're looking at another devblog. This is for the SAU-40, and Gaijin have named us the Ugly Duckling. If you don't know what the SAU-40 is, I don't really blame you. It's a pretty unknown piece of machinery which was around pre-World War II. It was pretty much a prototype of something that the Samua company wanted to make into a SPG, try and create a supportive vehicle. Now, when I was talking about the B1 TER, or the Bitter as I like to call it, in the video from a few days ago, or maybe even a week ago, I can't remember, I talked about how there was two sets of doctrine working with the French. Pretty much you had a primary battle tank, and then you had a tank which was much more of a supportive role. You'd have one which would push through the lines, and the other one which would hold back and support those tanks which were pushing through. Well, the SAU-40 was an attempt to create one of those tanks which would support tanks such as the S-35s, the Char-1 Bisses, the ones which were seen to push through the lines of the enemy. Also, the B1 TER is also added onto this, as it was a more improved version of the Char B1 Bis. So, this is the first time that we've had a look at one of these vehicles which is from the other side of the equation, instead of just one of the battle tanks that we've talked about. A more supportive vehicle, and the way it is designed and created, you can definitely see why that is the case. It is sat with a main armament of 175mm on the front of it, mounted on the chassis pretty much in the center of the vehicle. If you want to compare this to something like a Char-1 Bis, the main thing that it is missing is the fact that it doesn't have the 47mm on top. This was replaced with a 7.5mm, and the main reason I can see for that is so the commander didn't have as much to do. Also, the fact that it was built around the 75mm being able to support the tanks, and also on top of this, the fact that the commander could actually command the tank instead of firing the 47mm at the same time. So, we will talk about the S-35 tank in a video coming up. I'm going to do another 5 interesting vehicles, and it's going to be French ground vehicles, and you bet your bottom dollar that the S-35 is going to be in that. So this video we're going to focus on the SAU, talk about mainly how it's going to perform in game, and generally, is this something which, you know, is going to be worth researching? This is the first vehicle that we've seen in a devblog which isn't a bundle vehicle, and that generally to me means that we're actually getting pretty close to the launch of some kind of French tree. I feel like we've had a lot of devblogs over the last week or so, and yes, a lot of them have covered bundle vehicles, but generally, the fact that we're getting devblogs of vehicles which are just going to be in the standard tree, it's a good sign of it coming soon. Maybe before Christmas is definitely possible. But anyway, so what do we have out of this machine in general? We have a 75mm in the chassis, and then we have a cupola which has a 7.5mm machine gun. So disregarding the cupola, the only thing that Commander's cupola is going to do is it's going to get you killed, because people are going to lob shells into it, probably APHE, they're going to bounce down and they're going to kill the whole of your crew. So that's going to be a bit of an issue, since the 7.5mm is not going to be very useful. Now, something that you may realize is this looks very similar to another tank we already have in game, and that would be the 3-inch gun carrier. Now, the 3-inch gun carrier struggles in game because its frontal armor is not good enough. if its frontal armor was good enough, then it may have quite a decent chance at its BR. But around 3.0 and 3.3, the long-barreled 75mm Germans come along, and they say, how's your father, and take out that whole front of your tank from pretty much any range, pretty much making you useless in the battlefield. Now, hopefully, the SAU-40, which has a very similar configuration to that 3-inch gun carrier, its armor hopefully can be useful, meaning that its BR will be a lot lower. It talks in the Devblog that it will have 40mm of steel plating protecting the modules of the crew inside, meaning that if you penetrate the vehicle, it's going to be quite hard to kill everything at once. It's going to be easy to take out one compartment, but quite hard to take out the rest. So hopefully, you know, that helps out this machine a little bit, but the main thing that we have to hope for is that it has a BR, which means that its armor, at least frontally, because its side and back armor shouldn't be very good, it should be competitive. And if it isn't competitive, then the only time you'll see this machine is if people are grinding out the French tree, they want to use this in arcade, and they want to you know, get it fully researched and never touch it again. The other people who will use it is YouTubers who will try and get highlight reels of it and then realize that it's not worth it and just give up. Just like we got from the 3-inch gun carrier. I'm sure there was a lot of people trying to get highlight montages and all of that stuff with that, and I'm pretty sure people just gave up with it because it was so useless. And this machine has the opportunity to be exactly like that, unless it has a decent BR, which it can do, it definitely can do. I feel like around 2 or 2.3, its armor still wouldn't be good enough. Now, the reason why I say this is because it is French, it is going to be mainly fighting German. Now, what do we get from Germany at that BR? Well, we get the short-barreled 75. And what does that short-barreled 75 have? It has a heat shell which either pens 80mm or 100mm. Now, this machine does not have 100mm of armor on the front of it. Yes, it is slightly curved. Yes, parts of it may be as effective thickness be 100mm, but the main place which matters is that driver's port. And the reason for this is because the gun traverse is non-existent on this tank. With the 3-inch gun carrier, you get a little bit left and right. It means that you have a bit of flexibility, but not a lot. Just that tad. With the SAU-40, that is just not the case. The way to describe this is very much like the B1 BIS, where you'd have to turn the whole vehicle, and yes, it does have an interesting suspension system, meaning that it can turn rather quickly to be able to get that 75 on target, but overall you are going to have to turn the whole vehicle to even think about getting this gun anywhere near any type of target, which is definitely an issue. But let's talk about the characteristics of the gun itself. So the 75mm, I found a ton of different ammunition types that this machine could use, or at least I shouldn't say this machine, I should say 75mm around this time period which were French. And I'm going to use a one which I believe is the gun which you find on the SAU-40, but it is, you know, kind of hard to distinguish since it doesn't have the same name. So if I've got this wrong, I apologize, but even if it is wrong, it should be very similar to what I have stated here. So the caliber is obviously a 75. The weight of the projectile in general is 6.4 kilos with 90 grams of explosive. This is an APHE round, which will be the one which the majority of people use, and the penetration of it is 40mm at 30 degrees at 400mm. The velocity, 475 meters per second. So what we're pretty much looking here is a howitzer, which if it hits, if it dings on a target, is going to make them go boom. And that is interesting, because all of the other very similar guns that we've seen in games, so the 3-inch gun carrier, full-on AP. So once it pens, it still does a lot of damage, but doesn't have that characteristic where if it hits, it's going to destroy. If we look at the Churchill Mark 1, with its, I believe it's a 75mm, I might be wrong on that, but basically it's hull-mounted gun, it only has HE and it only has shells. the way I would describe this gun is that it is the rank 1 equivalent of a KV2 gun, whereas if a KV2 gun gets on target, if you're able to get the muzzle velocity right, if you're able to log the shot, then whatever you see in front of you is just going to disappear from existence. But whereas the KV2 has a turret, it has a way to turn the turret and also traverse pretty well, it has armor behind it, the SAU-40 does not have the traverse, which something like a KV2 has, therefore being able to shoot it in the side and shoot it in the rear should be very easy to do, and also, as I said, talk about that commander's weak spot at the top, or just shooting straight for the driver, knocking him out, basically making this thing completely useless. But on top of that, the frontal armor may not stand up. Just like the KV's frontal armor doesn't really stand up, but at least it has some strong points. Hopefully, it does stand up at the BR, but as I said, we don't know. Something else to add to this is the 3-inch gun carrier. The 3-inch gun carrier, the main reason why it struggles is the fact that it's incredibly heavy. If you look at the tonnage on it, I believe it's like 39.5 tons, and for an engine the size of what it has, that is not good. That is very bad. Now, if we look at the SAU-40, even though it has an increased weight of 24 tons, even though they took away the 47mm off of the S35 and took away some other stuff, they did add a bunch of weight in the form of a reshaped hull and also some other things. So because of that, maybe the SAU-40 is a little bit more nimble than what we see from the 3-inch gun carrier. It did have a slightly better engine, or at least power to weight ratio wise. It was able to canter around a little bit, and it was lighter than the 3-inch gun carrier. So a lot of people thinking about the 3-inch, one of the biggest issues it has is its traverse is terrible and its turning is terrible, even with all of the upgrades. Well, the SAU has the ability for its traverse to be not terrible and good enough, and also the ability to canter to a position and kind of sit there. But as I said, all depends on the armor, and even if the armor is good enough, what's going to happen is there will be weak spots. There always is. And also, if people can't be bothered to shoot for your weak spots, then they'll just shoot for your breach over and over and over again. And yes, you'll get points, yes, you'll get research, but you won't contribute to the battle, which generally is what the majority of people want to do. So as a first tank that this is in the normal tree, compared to the other 3 bundles that we have looked at, it is kind of disappointing. The SAU-40 is an interesting tank, don't get me wrong. It has a massive gun on it, it's going to be a lower BR, it's perfect to introduce people to the Devblogs, but what I was hoping for was something like an S35 or a Char 1 BIS, but maybe this is just to try and get people involved. Even the Renault FT. The Renault FT hasn't been talked about. I think it will be a perfect reserve tank for the French. But hopefully, with the SAU-40, it does get a decent BR. And it is actually balanced by its armor instead... Oh, sorry, it's balanced by its gun instead of its armor. Whereas a lot of other machines, like the Matilda, the 3-inch, most of the Churchills, apart from maybe the last one, and a lot of other heavy tanks in the game are balanced by their gun, are balanced by their armor instead of their gun. I think this has the ability to be balanced the other way around, and hopefully it's okay. But it's very hard to tell, because if they put this thing at 1.3, it should do really well. If they put this thing at 2.3, it won't do as well. You see what I mean? But I believe it's going to be around 2.3, 2.7, and it'll be dead on arrival. But look forward to those montages where, you know, YouTubers and other people try and make some really cool kills in it while they die, 50 times over just to get 1 kill. But yeah, look forward to them. I suppose at least there's that in the future for you. I'll see you next time.